The silence in the council chamber was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the universal translators synchronizing 12 ancient languages. Ambassador Evelyn Vance maintained an upright posture, her fingers clasped behind her back to hide the tremor that threatened to betray her nerves. 43 years of diplomatic career had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for standing before the 12 species that had governed the galaxy for longer than humanity could comprehend. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of impossible engineering. Suspended in the void between three binary stars, the structure of living crystal pulsed with quantum energy, creating a space where time flowed differently. 1 second here was equivalent to an hour in the outer universe. It was the perfect place for decisions that would affect trillions of lives for millennia. Evelyn observed each of the arbiters. The Cathari, beings of plasma contained within magnetic fields, floated in their chambers to the left. The Vorshan, creatures of living stone that took centuries to complete a single sentence, remained motionless like mountains. In the center, elevated above all, sat High Arbiter Selvara of the Aeon, an entity whose form resembled a 20-foot crystalline octopus with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. For 3 decades, Evelyn had worked tirelessly. She presented the symphonies of Mozart and the equations of Einstein. She showed the cave paintings of Lascaux and the skyscrapers of Neo-Shanghai. She argued that humanity, though young, had something unique to offer the galactic tapestry. Now, finally, the verdict would arrive. Selvara's voice echoed through the translators, carrying harmonies that the human mind could barely process without technological aid. Ambassador Evelyn Vance of the Terran species, colloquially known as humanity, the Galactic Council has deliberated for 87 cycles regarding your species' petition for full integration into the stellar community. Evelyn felt her heart pound. This was the moment. 50 years since first contact, entire generations of humans born waiting for this answer. Your species has demonstrated remarkable capabilities, Selvara continued, and for an instant, Evelyn dared to hope. In a mere 5,000 planetary years, you evolved from hunter-gatherers to a civilization capable of interstellar travel. Your technological growth is unprecedented in our records. Selvara's crystalline tentacles moved in a pattern Evelyn had learned to recognize as discomfort. Precisely because of this, the Council has reached a unanimous conclusion. Humanity represents an existential threat to galactic order. The words fell like a hammer blow. Evelyn felt the floor disappear beneath her feet, but she maintained a neutral expression. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. A threat? She managed to keep her voice steady. We have never attacked any Council species. We respect all protocols. Our ships remain within established boundaries. True, admitted one of the Cathari, its voice like the crackle of a wildfire. But history shows that rapidly evolving technological species invariably become conquerors. You developed warp drive propulsion just 200 years after your first motorized flight, antimatter weaponry 50 years after mastering nuclear fission. This pattern is concerning. Furthermore, added a being that looked like a cloud of nanomachines called Overseer Unit 77, psychological analyses of your species reveal alarming tendencies: aggression in situations of scarcity, capacity to rationalize violence in the name of abstract ideologies, obstinate resistance even when surrender would be logically superior. Evelyn clenched her fists. That resistance you call obstinacy, we call courage. The ability to fight against impossible odds is what brought us from the caves to this chamber. Exactly our point, Selvara said. And there was something like pity in its multispectral voice. Ambassador, understand. We do not question your species' achievements. We question what you will do with them. The 12 races of this council have learned, through ages of conflict and near extinction, that stability requires containment, that progress must be measured, that wisdom comes with age. And you believe we cannot learn this? Evelyn felt the anger boiling beneath the diplomatic surface she had cultivated for decades. We believe you will not have the time, Selvara replied. Your species evolves too quickly. 1,000 years from now, what will you have created? 10,000? Even now, we detect experiments with technologies that we ourselves deemed too dangerous to develop. Temporal manipulation, black hole engineering, unrestricted artificial consciousness. Experiments we were openly sharing with this council, Evelyn protested. Full transparency as required by integration protocols. And that openness only confirmed our fears. One of the Vorshan finally spoke, each word taking seconds to form. You do not fear the unknown as you should. Where ancient races see wise boundaries not to be crossed, you see challenges to be conquered. Evelyn took a deep breath. Then what is the council's final verdict? Selvara expanded its tentacles in a gesture of finality. Humanity is deemed too dangerous to coexist with the established galactic order, not out of malice, but by nature. Therefore, we decree not the execution of your species, for that would make us the monsters we fear you will become, but total exile. Exile? Evelyn blinked. To where? The terminal vastness, the region beyond Kepler's edge, where dead stars wander and barren worlds orbit brown dwarfs. There, distant from our civilization, your species may evolve as it wishes without threatening the peace we have spent 50 million years building. The horror of the sentence settled in slowly. The terminal vastness was not just empty, it was a resource dead zone. No young stars, no habitable planets, no heavy element-rich nebulae. It was a slow death sentence. You will have 50 years to evacuate all human systems within civilized space, Selvara continued. After that deadline, any human found will be eliminated for the safety of the galactic community. Council escort ships will be provided to ensure you reach your destination. 50 years to move billions of people, Evelyn said, her voice cold as the vacuum. You know that means genocide by neglect. We do not have enough ships. We do not have the resources to build them in that time frame. Then your species will have to make difficult choices, said the Cathari, as all species eventually do. We consider this outcome more merciful than the alternatives. Evelyn looked at each of the arbiters, seeing the decision already crystallized in their alien forms. There was no appeal. There was no negotiation. The council had spoken, and its word was absolute law across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Something shifted within her at that moment. The hope she had carried for decades. The belief that diplomacy and reason would prevail, evaporated like water in a vacuum. What remained was something colder, harder. Very well, she said, keeping her voice perfectly controlled. If the Galactic Council has decreed that humanity must be exiled into the darkness, then so be it. But allow me to leave one final thought for your deliberations across the ages. Selvara inclined slightly. Speak. You look at our youth, and see danger. You look at our curiosity and see recklessness. You look at our resilience and see obstinacy. But there is something you fail to consider in your careful analyses and your decades of deliberation. Evelyn took a step forward, and for the first time in 40 years of diplomatic service, she allowed her true anger to show. When you cast us into the darkness, you are betting that the darkness will consume us. You are betting that our young, reckless species will break under the weight of exile. You are betting that, distant from the stars you govern, we will wither and disappear, becoming just another footnote in the galactic annals. She smiled, and there was no humor in that smile. But the history of humanity is the history of surviving the impossible. We survived the Ice Age with only fire and furs. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived wars that burned continents. And every time we should have died, every time extinction seemed certain, we didn't just survive. We came back stronger. The silence in the chamber was different now, tense. So yes, take our hope, take our worlds. Cast us into the terminal vastness and believe you have solved your problem. But remember this day, High Arbiter. Remember that in trying to bury humanity in the darkness, you have just planted the seed of something even your ancient minds cannot foresee. Evelyn turned to leave, then stopped and looked back one last time. Because if there is one thing darkness does well, it is forging diamonds under pressure. And when we return, and we will return, it will not be as supplicants asking for a seat at the table. It will be to remind the galaxy why some seeds should never be planted. She walked out of the council chamber as the arbiters remained in stunned silence. Behind her, Selvara watched the human depart, and for the first time in 1,000 years of existence, the High Arbiter felt something it had not experienced since its own youth. Fear. But it was too late. The verdict had been given. Humanity would be exiled, and the Council could finally return to its millennia of peace. What a terrible mistake they had just made. None of them could yet imagine. 50 years after the verdict, the space near Earth was unrecognizable. Where research stations and commercial docks once orbited, now floated, calculatedly positioned debris. Empty hulls of colony ships, strategically damaged to look like victims of catastrophic warp, drive failures. Distress signals on a loop, broadcasting desperate messages about failing life support systems and dying populations. It was all a lie. Commander Marcus Chen watched the fake transmissions from inside the Obscura Citadel, a moon-sized structure hidden deep within the Veil Nebula. The nebula was too dense for conventional sensors to penetrate, and humanity had learned to use that blindness to its advantage. Vorshan probe detected in Sector 7-3, announced Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo from the sensor station. Scan pattern matches exile compliance verification. Perfect. Marcus allowed himself a cold smile. Activate misery protocol. I want them to see exactly what we expect them to see. On the screens, programmed, debris began emitting residual thermal radiation, simulating recent reactor failures. Decompression chambers released frozen atmosphere, creating clouds of ice crystals that looked like ruptured life support systems. Even the distress signals were modulated to include static interference, suggesting poorly maintained equipment. The Vorshan probe, a construct of living stone and quantum technology, floated slowly through the debris field. Its sensors scanned every fragment, every signal, every anomaly. Marcus held his breath. 5 decades of work depended on this moment repeating perfectly. After 3 hours of meticulous inspection, the probe turned and departed at sublight speed, satisfied that the exile was proceeding as planned. The humans were dying in the darkness, exactly as the Council had predicted. They swallowed the bait. Sarah allowed herself a minimal relaxation. That makes 18 consecutive inspections without suspicion. 18 of how many more will come, Marcus replied. The Council's vigilance will decrease over time. They will assume the problem is solved and turn their attention back to their own political intrigues. It is the arrogance of those who have ruled unchallenged for too long. He turned to the communications panel. Connect me with Admiral Reeves at the primary forge. The screen flickered, revealing a woman. In her early 50s, graying hair pulled back in an impeccable military bun. Admiral Catherine Reeves was a direct descendant of some of the greatest scientists who had embarked on the first exile fleets. Her eyes carried the hardness of someone who had grown up hearing stories of billions killed in the early years of the exile. Marcus, she greeted. The probe departed 2 minutes ago. We're clean for another 6 months. Good, because the primary forge just finalized the 23rd Vanguard Lance. Catherine rotated the camera, revealing through her command room window a sight that would have brought any galactic civilization to a shocked halt. The primary forge was a construction station the size of a small planet, nestled in the heart of a dying brown dwarf, harnessing every ounce of energy from the agonizing star. Thousands of robotic arms worked non-stop, and floating in perfect formation, 23 warships that defied all known principles of galactic engineering. The Vanguard Lancers looked nothing like what the ancient races built, where Council ships were organic, fluid, almost artistic in their millennia-old design. The Lancers were brutalist, sharp angles, matte black that absorbed sensors, surfaces etched with equations that were part of the very armor structure. 23, Marcus whistled softly. The schedule projected 19 by the end of the cycle. Dr. Ivanov found a way to optimize the quantum fusion process for the hulls, Catherine explained. Reduced construction time by 22%. More importantly, we managed to integrate the new collapsed particle cannons. Tests show they completely ignore the Kithari multi-layered shields. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. Kithari shields were considered the most powerful defense known. Energy fields interwoven across 7 dimensions simultaneously, impossible to breach with conventional weaponry. Humanity had just rendered them obsolete. There's more, Catherine continued, and now there was genuine excitement in her voice. The Propulsion Research Division had a breakthrough. You know the Alcubierre warp drive we've been using for 2 centuries? Of course. It curves space-time around the ship, allowing superluminal speeds without violating relativity. Exactly. Well, Dr. Tanaka discovered that if we modulate the warp bubble at specific frequencies, we can create a cascade resonance. Essentially, each ship amplifies the efficiency of the others when traveling in formation. Marcus processed the implications. That means an entire fleet can travel at a speed that previously required 10 times the energy. Not only that, it means we can move our complete fleet through civilized space before the Council has time to coordinate a response. While they debate in their deliberation chambers that take weeks for a single session, we will be 3 systems ahead. It was brilliant. 50 years in the darkness had forced humanity to reinvent everything. Without access to the rare materials of the rich worlds in the civilized zones, they had developed alternatives based on different fundamental principles. Without the possibility of buying technology from the ancient races, they created their own from scratch. And more importantly, without the stagnation that came from millennia of comfort, they maintained the speed of innovation that had so frightened the Council. "When do we start?" Marcus asked. Catherine consulted a data pad. High Command has set the start date for Operation Awakening for 14 months from now. That gives us time to complete 12 more Lancers and finalize crew training. And the primary target? The Kreshnar warrior empire. Catherine's voice hardened. They led the coalition for our exile. It was their fleets that personally chose the worlds for demonstrative destruction when we resisted the initial evacuation. It was they who killed Admiral Harrison and the entire Third Fleet when they tried to negotiate better terms. Marcus remembered the transmissions. He was only 12 when he watched, helpless, as his aunt's ships were vaporized one by one. The Kreshnar were warriors from a culture that valued strength above all else. 4-meter-tall creatures with reinforced chitin exoskeletons, they had conquered 20 systems even before encountering the Council. Their integration had been different from humanity's. "It won't just be revenge," Catherine said, reading his expression. "The Kreshnar control the trade routes of the Orion Quadrant. If we take their territory, we cut the supply lines of half the Council. More importantly, we send a message." "What message?" "That we are no longer refugees, that the exile did not break us, and that the new galactic order will not be decided by deliberations that take ages, but by who has the courage to act." Marcus nodded slowly. "Is there resistance in High Command? Some still advocate for diplomacy." "Less every year," Catherine sighed. "The exiled generation is reaching the end of their lives, those who remember Earth before the verdict. But the new generation, those born in the terminal vastness, they know nothing but darkness and scarcity. To them, the Council are not potential allies, but the murderers who condemned billions." It was true. The human population had plummeted from 12 billion to less than 3 in the first 20 years of exile. Famine, cold, cascading failures of life support systems on overcrowded ships. Entire generations grew up hearing stories of grandparents who died because there wasn't enough oxygen, of siblings who were never born because resources had to be rationed. That pain, that anger, was the fuel that drove the war machine humanity had become. "Communication to all units," Marcus decided. "Intensify the concealment protocol. I want total silence drills in all sectors. When Operation Awakening begins, it needs to be an absolute surprise. Not a single signal, not a single energy emission out of pattern." "Understood. And Marcus?" Catherine paused. "When we return to civilized space, we will not be the same humans they exiled. 50 years of survival on the edge have changed our species, not in genetics, but in mindset. We have to be prepared for what that means." Marcus understood the concern. There were stories in ancient fiction about civilizations that became what they fought. But looking at the Vanguard Lancers, at the determination on the faces of every crew member, he knew there was no turning back. "Ambassador Vance said something before she died," Marcus commented. "She came to visit me in the hospital after the Kreshnar attack. I was recovering, only 13 years old. She held my hand and said that one day our species would have to choose between forgiving or winning. And what was her answer? Marcus smiled humorlessly. She said the real question wasn't that. It was whether we could find a way to do both, to win so completely that forgiveness became our choice, not our necessity. Catherine was silent for a moment. Then that is what we will do. We will break the council. We will demonstrate that 50 years in the darkness did not weaken us. And then, when they are on their knees, we will show the mercy they denied us. And if they don't surrender, then they will find out why they should never have given humanity time to prepare. The transmission ended. Marcus turned to the observation window, looking out at the nebula that hid them. Out there, invisible to the council in its arrogance, a storm was brewing. A storm forged in 50 years of suffering, anger, and unwavering determination. The Galactic Council had made many mistakes in its millions of years of existence, but exiling humanity would be remembered as the greatest of them all. The Kreshnar Patrol, Ship Conqueror's era, slid through the boundaries of the Tau 9 system, a secondary trade route connecting the eastern colonies to the Warrior Empire's core worlds. Captain Vorkresh, a veteran of 300 cycles of service, watched the sensor screens with the characteristic boredom of someone who had spent decades encountering nothing more threatening than occasional pirates. Nothing in the electromagnetic spectrum reported his second-in-command. Nothing in the gravitational spectrum, sector clear as anticipated. Vorkresh clicked his mandibles in agreement. It had been this way for generations. Since the Kreshnar had joined the Council, patrol life had become routine. The only real battles happened in the ritual combat arenas, not in the vacuum of space. He almost missed the old days, when his species conquered system after system before being domesticated by the Council. Captain, the sensor voice resonated with a note of confusion. Detecting gravitational anomaly in Sector 379, it's as if something is curving space-time, but there is no standard warp emission. Amplify, Vorkresh ordered, boredom giving way to curiosity. The screen showed distortions in the spatial fabric. It was not a conventional Alcubierre warp drive, where the ship created a bubble around itself. It was something different. Multiple interwoven bubbles, resonating at frequencies that Kreshnar sensors could barely detect. How many sources? Impossible to determine, sir. The resonance is masking individual signatures. It could be one ship, it could be 50. Alarms began to sound. Vorkresh felt his warrior instincts, dormant for centuries of forced peace, awaken. Shields to maximum, weapons charged, transmit emergency code to Fleet Command. But before the transmission could be sent, space simply tore open. It was not a smooth warp transition where ships gradually emerged from a superluminal speeds. It was a violent rupture in reality, as if something had pierced the universe from within. And through that perforation, they came. 23 ships black as the void, impossible angles, surfaces that seemed to absorb the light of the surrounding stars. Humanity's vanguard lancers emerged in perfect combat formation, already locked onto their targets before the Kreshnar could process what they were seeing. Identify, Vorkresh roared. No match in the Galactic database, the sensor operator replied, voice trembling. Unknown technology, unknown energy patterns. Sir, they are pointing weapons at us. Transmission on all frequencies, Vorkresh ordered. Identify yourselves or be considered hostile. The response came not in words, but in brilliant blue light. The collapsed particle cannons of the Lancers fired simultaneously. beams of matter compressed to impossible densities crossed space at the speed of light. The multi-layered shields of the Conqueror's era, the pride of Kreshnar engineering, designed to withstand even antimatter weapons, simply ceased to exist for the shots. The collapsed particles operated on a different principle. Instead of pushing against the shields, they ignored them completely, passing through each dimensional layer as if they were non-existent. When they hit the hull, the energy released was catastrophic. Vorkresh only had time for one final thought before his ship disintegrated around him. They came back. The explosion was visible for 3 adjacent systems. On the Lance Alpha, the human fleet's flagship, Admiral Catherine Reeves watched the data from the first engagement with clinical satisfaction. Time from detection to complete destruction, 7.3 seconds, reported Commander Chen. No transmission escaped. The communications blackout worked perfectly. Good. Catherine kept her voice neutral, but inside she allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. 50 years of preparation, 50 years of suffering, and in 7 seconds, they demonstrated that it had all been worth it. Next target, the Kreshnar trade station in orbit of Tau 9 Gamma. Commander Chen, you have tactical control. Marcus took his post at the war station. The screens showed the station, a massive structure of metal and crystal where thousands of Kreshnar and other species traded goods from 10 different sectors. Admiral, there are civilians on the station, he observed, not just Kreshnar, detecting life signs from at least 8 council species. Calculated mercy protocol, Catherine ordered. Open transmission. Communications were opened, and for the first time in 50 years, the human voice echoed in civilized space. Attention, Tau 9 Gamma Trade Station. This is Admiral Catherine Reeves of the Human Vanguard. You have 60 minutes to evacuate all civilians. I repeat, 60 minutes. After this period, this station will be considered a Kreshnar military asset and will be destroyed. Stunned silence on the other side. Then, a Kreshnar voice, filled with disbelief and anger. Humans, this is impossible. You were exiled. You are dead in the terminal vastness. Clearly, Catherine replied, with an almost conversational tone. Reports of our death were greatly exaggerated. 59 minutes remaining. Chaos erupted on the station. Alarms blared. Civilian ships began frantically decoupling. Merchants from a dozen species rushed to the evacuation docks, abandoning valuable cargo in a panic. Marcus watched the sensors show the exodus. They are evacuating. Estimated success rate of 92% if we maintain the schedule. We will maintain it, Catherine confirmed. I want every species that witnesses this to spread the story. I want them to know that we are not monsters who massacre indiscriminately. We are precise, we are fair, and we are relentless. 58 minutes later, the last civilian ship escaped the blast radius. The station now contained only Kreshnar troops and military equipment. Time expired, Marcus reported. Target locked. Fire. 3 Vanguard Lancers fired in sync. The station, a structure that had taken decades to build, which processed the trade of trillions of galactic credits annually, simply ceased to exist. In its place, a cloud of hot debris expanding into the vacuum. Catherine activated long-range communications. It was time to make an announcement. This is a message to the Kreshnar Warrior Empire and to the Galactic Council. 50 years ago, you judged us, too dangerous to coexist with your order. You exiled us to the darkness, believing we would die. You were wrong." She paused, letting the words resonate through communication relays that would carry the message to 1,000 systems. Humanity survived, and in the process, we became exactly what you feared. But with one crucial difference, we learned from your mistakes. We will not seek extermination. We will not impose unnecessary suffering, but we will reclaim our place in the galaxy. On the screen, Marcus saw the coordinates of the next targets already being loaded into the tactical system. 12 Kreshnar, military installations scattered across the systems that once belonged to humanity. To the Kreshnar Empire, Catherine continued, we offer a choice: surrender now, and your civilian populations will be treated with the dignity you denied us. Resist, and you will discover that 50 years in the darkness taught us exactly how far we are willing to go. And to the Galactic Council, observe and learn. The order that governed for millions of years is ending, not by our choice, but by yours. When you exiled us, you planted the seeds of this harvest. Now it is time to face the consequences. The transmission was cut. Catherine turned to her crew. Initiate Phase 2 of Operation Awakening. I want every system that was once human territory under our control in 72 hours. Show precision. Show discipline. And above all, show that we are different from the tyrants who judged us. The Vanguard Lances split, each heading for predetermined targets. And as they crossed the void, their unique warp signatures echoed like silent thunder. In the Kreshnar Prime system, the Warrior Empire's homeworld, sensors finally detected the gravitational anomalies. Military commanders who had not fought a real war in centuries looked at the data with growing horror. 23 unknown signatures, technology that matched no file, and an impossible message: the humans had returned. High Commander Zarkesh, Supreme Leader of the Kreshnar military forces, called an emergency meeting. Veterans of ancient wars, preserved in stasis for centuries, were awakened. Arsenals that had gathered dust were reopened. But as the Warrior Empire mobilized for a conflict they believed they could win, they did not understand the true extent of the mistake. Humanity was not coming with 23 ships. Those were just the vanguard, deep within the terminal vastness, hidden in nebulae and behind dying, brown dwarfs. 347 Vanguard Lances awaited the activation order, and behind them, shipyards that were already beginning to build the next generation. Bigger ships, faster, more deadly. The Galactic Council had bet that the darkness would consume humanity. Now, the darkness was coming to consume them, and it brought with it a storm of blue light and calculated vengeance. The council chamber was in turmoil for the first time in 10,000 years. Where normally reigned the contemplative silence of deliberations that lasted weeks, now echoed raised voices in panic and disbelief. "Impossible," thundered the Cathari representative, its plasma form pulsing with colors, indicating extreme rage. "We personally verified the debris fields. The humans were dying. Our own sensors confirmed systemic failures in their fleets." Clearly, Selvara's voice cut through the chaos. We were deceived, and masterfully so. The High Arbiter floated on its central platform, crystalline tentacles trembling with something it had not experienced for millennia. Genuine fear. The transmissions cascaded in. 12 Kreshnar military installations destroyed in 72 hours. 0 civilian casualties. Surgical precision that defied everything they knew about warfare. They studied us, observed Overseer Unit 77, its cloud of nanomachines forming complex analysis patterns. 50 years observing our patrols, learning our patterns, identifying our weaknesses. While we believed we had solved a problem, we were being systematically dissected. One of the Vorshan elders, finally completing a sentence he had started hours earlier, ruminated, "We underestimated the adaptability of this young species." Underestimation? A new delegate entered the chamber, a being who rarely participated in sessions. Matriarch Tashari, representative of a pacifist species of telepaths who had suffered under Kreshanar rule before their forced integration into the Council. Or was this exactly the result some of us predicted? Selvara rotated to face her. "Explain yourself, Matriarch." "When the exile verdict was announced, my species voted against it," Tashari reminded, her voice soft but firm. "We argued that punishing an entire species for potential future crimes was unjust. We were ignored. Now the Kreshanar reap what they sowed. You dare suggest we deserve this?" The Kreshanar delegate, Zarkesh, had traveled personally to the chamber. "My empire is losing systems every hour. Our fleets cannot even track these human ships." "Your empire," Tashari repeated, "built on the conquest of weaker species, maintained through the threat of force. Perhaps the humans are simply showing you how it feels to be on the other side of that equation." The silence that followed was tense. Other species present, many of whom had been forced to join the Council under similar circumstances, exchanged meaningful glances. "Order!" Selvara expanded its tentacles in a gesture of authority. "Matriarch Tashari, your historical resentment is not relevant to the current crisis. We need a coordinated response." "Response?" Tashari tilted her head. "High Arbiter, with all due respect, perhaps the real question is, why should we respond? The humans have only attacked Kreshanar military targets. They evacuated civilians. They have demonstrated more restraint in 3 days of war than the Council has shown in millennia of peace." Murmurs of agreement echoed from delegates of smaller species. The political calculation was shifting before Selvara's eyes. "Are you suggesting capitulation?" The Cathari representative was incredulous. "I am suggesting," Tashari replied calmly, "that perhaps the humans are not our enemies. Perhaps they are the change this galaxy has needed for a long time." Before anyone could respond, a new transmission arrived. Selvara projected it for all to see. It was Admiral Catherine Reeves, broadcasting from somewhere in Kreshanar space. "Galactic Council, I am aware you are in emergency session. Allow me to save you some deliberation time." Her image was sharp, confident. Behind her, through the observation windows, the Vanguard Lances were visible in formation. In 72 hours, humanity has reclaimed 12 systems. 5 were ceded without resistance. When the local population realized we offered equal protection for all species, not domination. She paused, letting the implication sink in. "Contrary to the Council's belief, we do not seek genocide. We seek justice. And more importantly, we seek to build something better than the stagnant empire you maintain. To the Kreshanar, we offer final terms of surrender. Hand over your high command for trial. For war crimes against humanity. Demilitarize your offensive fleets. In exchange, your civilian populations will receive complete protection and local autonomy." Zarkesh roared. "Never. Kreshanar does not kneel." But Catherine continued as if she had not been interrupted. "To the other Council species, especially those who were forced to join against their will, We offer an alternative, the new Galactic Alliance, based not on time of existence or military power, but on merit, innovation, and universal dignity. Silvara felt control slipping from its tentacles. This was not just a military campaign, it was a political revolution. You have 72 hours to consider, Catherine concluded. Choose wisely, because unlike the Council, which deliberates for ages, humanity acts. And we are just getting started. The transmission was cut. The chamber exploded into discussion again. This is outrageous, the Cathari thundered. We must mobilize all Council fleets and crush this insurrection before it spreads. With what fleets? Tashari asked softly. Our military technologies have not been significantly updated in 5,000 years. We believe superiority would come from age, not innovation. The humans have just demonstrated how wrong we were. The matriarch has a point, admitted Overseer Unit 77. Tactical analysis of the last 72 hours shows human technology surpassing ours in 7 critical metrics: warp speed, weapon power, target precision, energy efficiency, concealment, response time, and most concerningly, fleet coordination. Then what do you suggest? Silvara asked, voice weary. That we simply surrender to a species that governed caves when our ancestors were already navigating the stars? I suggest, Unit 77 replied, that we recognize that age does not guarantee wisdom, only old habits. In the Kreshna Prime system, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Zarkesh returned to find his empire on the brink of collapse. Not from military defeat yet, but from something more insidious: ideological desertion. 3 Kreshnar colonial worlds had declared neutrality. 4 regional governors had secretly contacted human forces, seeking terms of surrender. And most shockingly, a third of the Stellar Fleet had simply refused orders to engage the human lancers. Traitors! Zarkesh roared in his command room. They will all be executed for cowardice. With all due respect, High Commander, his oldest advisor, Vorkath, said carefully, perhaps we should consider the human terms. Our civilian population is terrified. Our colonies are rebelling. And every hour, more species join this new alliance. Never. Zarkesh slammed his chitinous claw on the table, cracking the metal. Kreshnar are warriors. We will fight until the last drop of blood, even if it means the extinction of our species. Zarkesh froze. For the first time in his long life, he faced an uncomfortable truth. He could lose not just a war, but his very civilization. In the liberated systems, something remarkable was happening. Marcus Chen personally oversaw the transition of the system, formerly known as Tau 9. Integration report, he requested. Lieutenant Okonkwo consulted her pad. 83% of the local population accepted the new alliance terms. The surrendered Kreshnar military are in comfortable custody, awaiting processing. We detected only 2 incidents of violence, both quickly contained by local militias, not our forces. And the other species? The Tashari were the first to officially join, followed by the Quillari, Narvan, and surprisingly, a dissident faction of the Vor-Shan. Apparently, not all the elders approved of the original exile decision. Marcus allowed himself a smile. So we are not just reclaiming territory, we are offering an alternative vision of governance. Exactly. And the local populations are responding. For the first time in millennia, smaller species have a real voice. The Council governed through the deliberation of the ancient races. We are offering democracy based on competence, It was brilliant. Marcus recognized Catherine was not just fighting a military war, she was fighting a war of ideas. And ideas, once planted, were harder to eradicate than any fleet. An alert sounded. Commander, detecting warp signature emerging in the system perimeter. Unknown configuration. Marcus tensed. Red alert. Identify. Moments later, the answer arrived. Sir, it's a Tashari diplomatic vessel. They are transmitting surrender codes and requesting permission to dock. Granted, but maintain vigilance. Hours later, Marcus found himself face-to-face with Matriarch Tashari, the same one who had challenged Selvara in the chamber. Commander Chen, she greeted, her telepathic voice resonating directly in his mind with permission. I came representing not just my species, but a coalition of 6 races who wish to formally join your new alliance. 6 races? Marcus was surprised. That's almost half of the Council's smaller species. And growing every hour. Tashari confirmed. You offered something the Council never did. Choice. Most of us did not join the Council voluntarily. We were conquered, absorbed, or coerced. But you, even in war, ask instead of ordering. We are not conquerors, Marcus said firmly. We are survivors. And survivors understand the value of every ally. That's precisely why we came. But I must warn you, Commander, Selvara won't yield easily. She has ruled for 1,000 years. To her, conceding to humans would be admitting that everything she fought for was wrong. Then she'll have to learn what we did, Marcus replied. That being wrong isn't the end. It's an opportunity to finally get it right. Tashari inclined her head, respectfully. Your 50 years in exile taught you wisdom that took some species millennia to learn. Perhaps the Council was right to fear you, just wrong about the reason. What would the right reason be? Not that you were dangerous, the matriarch smiled, but that you were transformative. And transformation always frightens those who benefit from the status quo. As the galactic night deepened, the battle lines became clear. On one side, the traditional council, led by Selvara and supported by the Kreshnar and Kethari. On the other, the human new alliance, growing hourly with species who finally saw an alternative. And in the middle, millions of beings watched, waiting to see which vision of the future would prevail. The galaxy was changing. And for the first time in ages, nobody knew exactly how it would end. The Aeon Prime system had never been attacked. In 15 million years of existence, the Aeon homeworld, Selvara's seat of power, and the physical headquarters of the Galactic Council had remained untouched by conflict. Its location, deep within a dense star cluster, made navigation extremely difficult. The interwoven gravitational fields of 17 stars created a deadly maze for any ship unfamiliar with the precise routes. It was considered the safest place in the galaxy, until today. Admiral, we have reached the edge of the cluster, reported the navigator aboard the Alpha Lance. Detecting the predicted gravitational distortions. Conventional navigation is confirmed impossible without the Council's route codes. Catherine Reeves watched the sea of stars before her. 347 Vanguard Lancers floated in formation. Humanity's entire fleet gathered for the first time since the exile. Surrounding them were the ships of the new alliance, Tashari corvettes, Quillari cruisers, even a few Vorshan units that had defected from the Council. Conventional, Catherine repeated with a cold smile. Good thing we didn't plan on being conventional. Dr. Tanaka, is your gift for the Council ready? On the comm screen, humanity's chief scientist, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, his hair now completely white, but his eyes still bright with enthusiasm, nodded affirmatively. Admiral, the root weaver is calibrated. Theoretically, we can map a path through the cluster in real time using quantum gravitational sensors. But I must warn you, theoretically is the key word here. What are the chances of success? Tanaka hesitated. Honestly, 62%. There's a 38% chance the entire fleet will be torn apart by tidal gravitational forces. Silence on the command channel. Then Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even herself. 50 years ago, our chances of surviving the exile were estimated at less than 10%. 62 sounds like a safe bet. Activate the Weaver. The space around the human fleet began to glow with complex patterns of blue light. The quantum sensors, another innovation born of necessity in the terminal void, mapped every gravitational distortion, every temporal anomaly, every point of instability in the fabric of space-time. And then the fleet plunged into the impossible. To external observers, the ships simply vanished, as if swallowed by space itself. But inside each lance, the crews experienced something very different. The Root Weaver didn't just detect safe routes, it created them dynamically. Micro-warp bubbles opened and closed in milliseconds, guiding the ships through the gravitational labyrinth, like water flowing along the paths of least resistance. Marcus Chen, now commanding one of the Vanguard Lancers, watched his navigation panel with a mix of awe and terror. They were dancing between forces that could crush their ships like empty cans, guided only by quantum calculations and sheer human audacity. "Commander," his navigator said, voice strained, "we've crossed the first third of the cluster. 0 casualties." "Hold the course," Marcus ordered, feigning a calm he didn't feel. The Weaver knows the way. 6 hours later, the impossible became reality. The human fleet emerged into the inner system of Aeon Prime, having bypassed defenses that had protected the galactic capital for ages. The planet's sensors detected the arrivals simultaneously. Selvara, in her private chamber, felt something she hadn't experienced in millennia: utter disbelief. "Impossible," she whispered, through her crystalline tentacles. "No one can navigate the cluster without the ancestral codes." "Clearly," responded her military advisor, "the humans can. And they have just proven that our natural defenses are useless against them." Alarms echoed across Aeon Prime. For the first time in 15 million years, the world was under attack. Catherine opened a wide-range communication channel. "High Arbiter Selvara, this is the moment we both knew would come. 50 years ago, you told me humanity would be buried in the darkness. I ask you now, how is that prediction working out for you?" The reply came, and for the first time, Selvara's voice carried real emotion. Rage. "You are monsters. Attacking the galactic capital is an act of war against all civilized species." "No," Catherine corrected. "It is an act of war against a government that refuses to evolve, against an order that prioritizes antiquity over merit, and against a leadership that prefers to exterminate those who disagree rather than face change." She paused, then her voice softened, almost gentle. "Selvara, you ruled well for a very long time. But time is not synonymous with wisdom. Sometimes it is merely synonymous with stubbornness. We offer you what your council denied us: a chance to surrender with dignity." "Never," The answer was immediate. Aeon Prime has defenses your young minds cannot comprehend. We have orbital stations, armed with technology millions of years old. We have force fields that envelop the entire planet. You cannot win. Perhaps, Catherine admitted, or perhaps you are betting on technology that hasn't been updated since before humanity discovered fire. There is only one way to find out. But before a single shot could be fired, something unexpected happened, an internal transmission from Aeon Prime. Not from Selvara, but from another source. The image showed thousands of Aeon, the civilian population of Selvara's own species, gathered in the central plazas of their crystalline cities. One of them, identified as Scholar Velmar, spoke, "High Arbiter, on behalf of countless citizens of Aeon Prime and allied species, we ask you to consider surrender. Not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. These humans have demonstrated superior military capability. More importantly, they have demonstrated moral restraint. They have not massacred civilians. They have not destroyed worlds. They offered dignity where they could have offered extermination." Another voice, this one from a Tishari elder, echoed, "For generations, we lived under the premise that the Council knew best. That age guaranteed wisdom. But perhaps we confused age with a fear of change. The humans remind us of what we once were, species willing to risk, to innovate, to grow." Selvara watched the transmissions with growing horror. It wasn't just a military mutiny, it was a popular revolution. "You don't understand," she transmitted to her own people. "Yielding now sets a dangerous precedent. If a young species can successfully challenge the established order, what will stop others from doing the same?" "Perhaps," Scholar Velmar replied softly, "nothing should stop them. Perhaps change is exactly what this galaxy needs." On the Alpha Lance, Catherine watched the drama unfold. Marcus appeared on her private channel. "Admiral, we could win militarily. Our weapons are superior. But something tells me this battle doesn't need to be fought with cannons." Catherine agreed. "Open a channel to Selvara, audio only, private." When the connection was established, she spoke not as an admiral to an enemy, but as one who had faced the impossible, to another who was now facing it. "Selvara, I know you hate me. I know you see our existence as an affront to everything you worked for. But consider this. You have ruled for 1,000 years. You have witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. You have seen empires rise and fall. Silence from the other side. Then you must know that all things eventually change. The question is not whether your era will end, but how. It can end in violence, with Aeon Prime turned into a battlefield. Or it can end with you choosing to ensure a peaceful transition to something better." "Better?" Selvara's voice was laced with bitterness. "You, who barely exist for a cosmic blink of an eye, believe you can build something better than the Council?" "We don't know," Catherine admitted honestly. "Maybe we will fail spectacularly. Maybe in 1,000 years another young species will challenge us the same way. But at least we will try. Because standing still, ruling through the fear of change, isn't governance. It's just a slow, comfortable death." More silence. Then, finally, Selvara's voice, weaker now. "If I yield, what happens to me?" "You will have a choice," Catherine answered. "You can retire to a private life, honored, but distant from politics. Or you can serve as a counselor in the new alliance, sharing your millions of years of accumulated knowledge, not as a ruler, but as a mentor. And my people? treated with the same respect as all species in the Alliance. The Aeon have much to offer. Just no longer as the only voice that matters. Hours passed in tense silence. The human fleet held position. Aeon Prime's defenses remained active, and billions of beings across 1,000 systems watched, waiting. Finally, Selvaara transmitted publicly. Citizens of Aeon Prime, members of the Council, witnesses of this era, I have ruled for longer than most civilizations have existed. I have seen the galaxy undergo countless transformations, and I always believed my duty was to preserve stability at any cost. She paused, and when she continued, there was something like acceptance in her voice. But stability without growth is not life. It is stasis. And perhaps, just perhaps, I confused my fear of change with ancestral wisdom. The humans have forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that age does not exempt us from being wrong. Another silence. Then, therefore, as High Arbiter of the Galactic Council, I officially declare a cessation of hostilities. Aeon Prime will surrender to the terms proposed by the new alliance. Let the galaxy bear witness. An era ends today. And perhaps, just perhaps, something better can begin. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly it began. First in the liberated systems, then in the neutral colonies. Finally, even on worlds still loyal to the old council. Celebration, not for military victory, but for something rarer. Choice. For the first time in ages, the galaxy had a choice about its own future. On the Alpha Lance, Catherine finally allowed herself to relax. 50 years of preparation, months of war, and it ended not with mass destruction, but with words and acceptance. Marcus appeared on her screen. Admiral, the Tashari are asking to land diplomatic teams. The Quillari want to initiate technology transfer. Even some Kreshinar are requesting integration into the new alliance. Grant all requests, Catherine ordered. But Marcus, make sure we treat the surrendering Kreshinar with the same dignity we offered the others. We are not like they were. Understood. And what about Selvaara? Catherine considered. Offer her the position of Counselor Emerita. She may resist change, but her knowledge is too valuable to waste. As night gave way to what would be remembered as the dawn of the new era, humanity finally understood the extent of what it had achieved. They hadn't just conquered systems or technology, they had conquered something more valuable, the right to define their own destiny. And they proved that sometimes the greatest victory is not destroying your enemies, but transforming them into allies. 20 years after the surrender of Aeon Prime, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The old council chamber had been transformed, where only 12 ancient species once deliberated. Now, 47 races sat in concentric circles of equal representation. There were no more raised platforms, no more hierarchies based on antiquity. Every delegate, from civilizations that had existed for millions of years, to species that had achieved space travel in the last few centuries, had an equal voice. Chancellor Sarah Chen, daughter of the late Marcus Chen and granddaughter of original exile colonists, stepped up to the central podium. At 42, she represented the new generation of human leadership, born in the darkness of the terminal void, but living to see the dawn of the new alliance. Delegates, citizens, friends, she began, her voice broadcast to trillions of beings across 1,000 systems. We gather today to mark the 20th anniversary of the end of the War of Awakening. But more importantly, To reflect on what we have built together since then? She looked around the chamber. There was Scholar Velmar, now Minister of Galactic Education, overseeing exchange programs between thousands of worlds. The Tashari Matriarch, serving as Chief Ambassador, mediating disputes with telepathic empathy that prevented misunderstandings. Even Zarkesh, the former Kreshnar High Commander, was in a surprising role. Instructor at the Unified Military Academy, teaching new generations about the dangers of unchecked warrior pride. And in a seat of honor, though she rarely spoke, sat Selvara. The former High Arbiter had accepted the role of Counselor Emerita, sharing millions of years of knowledge when requested, but never again ruling. 20 years ago, Sarah continued, humanity returned from exile with enough anger and power to burn half the galaxy. We could have sought total vengeance. We could have become the tyrants our exilers feared. But we chose a different path. On screens around the chamber, images flashed. Joint research stations where humans and Cathari worked side by side on fusion technology. Mixed colonies where former enemies raised children together. Universities where young people from a dozen species debated philosophy and science. We chose construction over destruction, integration over domination, and most importantly, we chose to accept that no single species, no matter how old or how young, has all the answers. She paused, then smiled. Humanity brought to this alliance our capacity for rapid innovation, our resilience, our stubborn refusal to ever accept the impossible. The Tashari contributed empathy and diplomacy, the Voshan, patience, and long-term perspective. The Kreshnar, after learning restraint, contributed tactical excellence and discipline. Every species, every culture, every perspective has made our alliance stronger. A Kalari delegate raised a hand. Chancellor, if I may ask a question. Of course, Delegate Sharis. There are species who still question whether the new alliance is truly different from the old council. They argue that we have merely traded the tyranny of the ancients for the tyranny of the young. How would you address that concern? Sarah nodded. It was a fair question. By showing results. In the last 20 years, 17 species have achieved interstellar travel for the first time. Not because we gave them the technology, but because we shared knowledge freely and supported them. 6 major territorial wars have been averted through mediation, not military force. And most importantly, we established a precedent. Leadership in the new alliance is not lifelong or hereditary. It is based on regular elections and demonstrated merit. She gestured to herself. I have been Chancellor for only 4 years. In 6, I will have to stand for re-election. If the citizens of the Alliance decide someone else can serve better, then I will step down. That is not tyranny. That is accountability. Selvara, from her seat of honor, spoke for the first time in months. Her ancient voice echoed through the translators. If I may add to Chancellor Chen's answer, I ruled for 1,000 years, believing my longevity gave me a perpetual right to power. I was wrong. The greatest lesson the humans taught was not through their weapons, but through their willingness to yield power when necessary. She paused, tentacles rippling in a pattern that indicated deep reflection. The old council failed because we confused stability with stagnation. We believed that because we had survived millions of years, our ways of governing were infallible. But survival is not success. It is merely the absence of catastrophic failure. The humans reminded us that truly living means risking, growing, and yes, sometimes being wrong. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber. Sarah waited for silence to return before continuing. But we are not gathered only to celebrate. We must also acknowledge challenges. The integration of such diverse species has not been without problems. We have had cultural conflicts, misunderstandings that almost escalated to violence, entire systems that initially resisted change. A projection showed data, small conflicts resolved, ethnic tensions mediated, resources redistributed to prevent scarcity. And there is an uncomfortable truth we must face. Our expansion has not been completely peaceful. 3 systems militarily resisted integration into the new alliance. In 2 cases, we achieved diplomatic resolution. In the 3rd, military intervention was necessary to protect civilian populations from their own tyrannical governments. She looked directly into the camera, addressing the trillions watching. We will not claim perfection. The new alliance makes mistakes. But unlike the old council, we admit when we are wrong. We learn, we adjust, and most importantly, we hold those in positions of power accountable. An example flashed on the screens. A human governor removed from office for abuse of authority and publicly tried. Justice applied equally, regardless of species. This is our commitment, Sarah declared. We will not build a perfect empire, because perfection is an illusion. We will build one that keeps trying to improve. One where every generation questions the assumptions of the last. One where change is embraced, not feared. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, now over 100 years old but still lucid, thanks to medical advances, was invited to the podium. The scientist who had created the root weaver and countless other innovations carried something in his hands. A small, simple-looking device. Chancellor, delegates, his voice was frail but firm. This device represents perhaps the greatest achievement of the last 20 years. It is not a weapon. It is not a shield. It is a next-generation universal translator. He activated the device. Immediately, everyone in the chamber felt something extraordinary. Not just comprehension of words, but of emotional context, cultural nuances, even concepts that had no direct translation. Developed in collaboration between 53 species, Tanaka continued, this translator doesn't just convert language, it shares experience. A human using this can truly grasp how a Tishari feels telepathic empathy. A Kreshnar can understand why humans value abstract concepts like hope. Sarah watched delegates experimenting with the device in wonder. She saw barriers of understanding that had existed for millennia crumble in real time. This is the future we chose to build, she said softly. Not just coexistence, but true understanding. Not just political alliance, but genuine connection between species that evolved on worlds so different that sharing a table was once considered impossible. A delegate from a newly integrated species, the Xylar crystalline silicon creatures from a high-gravity world, used the new translator to ask a question that echoed in the hearts of everyone present. Chancellor Chen, Councillor Emerita Selvara, a simple question. Was it worth it? All the conflict, all the bloodshed, all the lives lost on the way here, was it worth it? Sarah and Selvara exchanged glances. Then, surprisingly, they spoke in unison. Ask us in 100 years. Laughter echoed through the chamber, not of mockery, but of understanding. The work would never end. Perfection would never be achieved. But the effort, the constant attempt to do better, That was worth every sacrifice. As the session ended, Sarah remained at the podium, watching delegates from dozens of species talking, debating, laughing together. She saw a young human comparing notes with a Vorshan elder, a Kreshanar warrior sharing a meal with a Tashari diplomat. Her father, Marcus Chen, had died 5 years earlier, old and content. His last words to her had been, "We survived the exile. We won the war. Now it's up to your generation to win the peace." And looking around the chamber, Sarah believed they were succeeding. That night, in her private residence overlooking the space where the old council chamber floated, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Selvara, the former High Arbiter, had requested an audience. "Counselor," Sarah greeted her with genuine respect. "It is an honor." "The honor is mine, Chancellor." Selvara moved her tentacles in a pattern of humility. "I came because there is something I must say, something I have been putting off for 20 years. Speak freely. When I exiled your species, I believed I was saving the galaxy. I believed that youth equaled danger, that rapid change could only lead to destruction." Selvara paused. "I was completely, absolutely wrong. And because of that error, billions of humans died in exile. Entire civilizations were destroyed in the war that followed. And though I have lived for millions of years, this is the only decision that truly shames me." Sarah remained silent for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised even herself. "I forgive you." Selvara trembled. "How? After everything I took from your species?" "Because holding grudges doesn't build better futures. Because my grandfather, who died in exile, taught me that true strength lies in forgiving, not in avenging, and because, strangely, your mistake might have been the greatest gift humanity ever received." "Explain." Sarah gestured to the stars. "If we had been accepted into the Council 50 years ago, we would have become just another junior species among ancients. Complacent, stagnant. The exile forced our species to evolve in ways we never would have achieved in the comfort of galactic civilization. It gave us time to develop our own technology, our own perspective, and most importantly, it taught us the value of every life, every resource, every moment." She smiled. "So yes, the exile was terrible, brutal. It nearly destroyed us. But it also forged us into something unique. And that uniqueness is what allowed us to build this new alliance. Therefore, in a strange and painful way, I am grateful." Selvara remained silent for long moments. Then, slowly, her tentacles moved in a pattern Sarah had learned meant profound respect. "Your species is remarkable, not just for ingenuity or courage, but for the capacity to transform trauma into wisdom, pain into purpose, and perhaps most importantly, the capacity to forgive without forgetting." Sarah nodded. "It is what we try, to teach the new generations, not to erase history, but to learn from it. The exile happened, the war happened, millions died. Those truths will remain forever, but they will not define our future unless we allow them to." Outside the window, a transport ship passed, carrying students from a dozen species to the newly established Galactic University. Children who were born in an era of peace, who never knew the terror of exile or the roar of cannons in combat. "It is for them that we do this work," Sarah said softly, "so they never have to experience what our generations did, so they can build upon our successes and learn from our failures." Selvara looked at the student ship. "And when I finally pass, when my millions of years of existence come to an end, I will die knowing one truth that took ages to learn. Which one? That youth is not a weakness, it is a strength. And that sometimes the greatest gift the ancients can give the young is simply to get out of the way. Years passed, decades. The new alliance grew, stumbled, adjusted, and grew again. New species joined, technologies were shared, worlds, once isolated, became centers of culture and commerce. And in schools across 1,000 systems, young students of all species learned the same fundamental lesson: that humanity's exile, intended as a death sentence, became the creation myth of a new galactic era. An era where questions were valued more than ancient answers, where change was embraced, not feared, where every species, old or young, great or small, had a voice in the shared destiny. Peace reigned now, not a peace imposed by fear or force, but a chosen peace, a peace that recognized that conflict was inevitable, but violence was optional, a peace that demanded constant work, eternal vigilance, and the willingness to never be satisfied with the status quo. It was a peace forged in the remembrance that never again would humanity or any other species be cast into the darkness without a fight. And that when the darkness finally dissipated, what emerged might be not a monster, but a beacon guiding the galaxy toward a future where the question wasn't how long you had existed, but how much you were willing to grow. End of story. If humanity's tenacity and the wisdom of learning from the impossible inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more Chronicles from the Galactic frontier, where we explore not just the stars, but the limits of what it means to be human among the stars. Because in the vast universe, our greatest strength was never our technology or our weapons, but our absolute refusal to accept that any darkness can be permanent. Until the next journey among the stars.